One problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia.
Nobody talks about pedophilia.
It's the big secret.
And it's widespread?
Oh yeah. I was surrounded by them.
I thought I knew where I was getting into me. It was just food, just a job, just another kitchen. I was no one important, just another chef trying to survive in a city where talent was not enough. When I was offered the work, a salary 6 times larger than I did in any restaurant, I didn't even hesitate. Who would hesitate? But some doors, once open, have no return. What started as a dream became a nightmare that never ends. And it's not the kind of thing you can just forget. Because there are jobs you can't just leave. There are secrets that stick to you, that follow you, to haunt you every time you close your eyes. At first, I just wanted to cook. It was my passion, my obsession. But when you work for big people, powerful people, you realize that you are not always in control. In Diddy's kitchen, I thought it served refined dishes for the rich and famous. But what I was really serving, it was something I can't name without feeling my stomach to turn. And the worst, I couldn't leave. I couldn't ask. I couldn't even think much about it, because everyone who thought too much simply, it disappeared. If you think this kind of thing doesn't happen in real life, if you think this is just a story, just a theory, think again. I've worked in many kitchens in my life. I know how they sound, how they move, how they breathe. The kitchen of a great restaurant is never really silent. There is always something happening. Pinnings beating, knives by cutting, the squeak of meat sealing in the fire, conversations between the cooks, stuffed laughs, sometimes even a heated discussion. The kitchen has its own life. But that night, there was silence. I realized it as soon as I entered. The air was different, dense, cold, as if something was wrong, but no one wanted to talk about it. The only sound was my knife against the cutting board. Chop, chop, chop. Rhythmic, necessary. My movements were automatic. Years of practice do this. But my mind wasn't there. My gaze was stuck in the vacuum-sealed plastic bag that rested on the counter. That didn't seem right. It was not any piece of meat. I knew every type of cut that existed. I had worked with all types of protein, from ordinary chicken to rare Japanese Wagyu cuts. But that was different. It was not the color, although it seemed slightly wrong. Something kind of grayish, a little dark. It was not the smell, although there is something subtly strange in it too. It was an instinct, something primitive at the bottom of my mind screaming for me to drop it, to get out of there. But I couldn't just leave. I took the package. He was too cold even for refrigerated meat. I turned around, trying to find some indication of its origin. Nothing. No label, no supplier brand, no expiration date, nothing that told me what I was holding. Crossing the kitchen, I saw that the other cook who worked with me didn't look at me in my eyes. He was standing in front of the stove, stirring something in a pan, but his movements were tense, hasty. He knew something. He had seen it before. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice casual. "What is that?" He stopped. He did not turn to face me, did not answer immediately. It was just there, the rigid backs, the hands still holding the spoon over the pan. Then it murmured, "Just cooks." That's when I knew. If he were lying, he would have said something different. I would have laughed. I would have said, "It's cattle." I would have called me an idiot for asking. But he didn't say, he didn't mean, and that's when I felt. The air changed. My chest squeezed, my breath was shallow. Someone was behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Diddy. He was standing at the kitchen entrance watching me. Silk dress, bracelets, and gold rings shining under the cold light of the kitchen. He had a way of being there without making a noise, of coming up when you least expected, as if you always knew the right time to appear. My blood froze. I squeezed the knife harder than I should. Do not react. Don't ask anything. Don't show anything. Just cook. I cut the meat, trying to ignore the cold sweat that was formed at the back of my neck, slicing the unknown, working with something my instinct begged me not to play. Diddy smiled. "You're getting the way." I pretended I didn't hear. I just kept cutting, doing what you always did, pretending that none of this was happening. But deep down, I already knew. That night was the beginning of my hell. If there's one thing I learned in that house, Diddy would like to see fear. He liked to test people, to see how far they could go before they broke. It didn't matter if you were a cook, a security guard, a personal assistant. All there were pieces in his game. And that night, for the first time, I felt on my skin what it meant. I had cut the meat, cooked, prepared everything exactly as they sent. But when the time came to serve, I realized that something was wrong. In most nights, the dishes were taken by the waiters, as in any house of rich people. But that night, there were no waiters. "You will take the plate." The order came dry, unenforceable. I swallowed. Cooks didn't serve food on the table. That's not how it worked. But I had no choice. I took the plate and crossed the double doors to the dining room. The atmosphere was luxurious but suffocating. The air was thick with cigar smell and something more. Something metallic. The lights were low, shadows danced on the marble walls. The table was full of faces that I recognized on TV, the internet, the industry. Powerful people, people with money. But his eyes were wrong. They looked at me as predators. I walked to the tip of the table where he was sitting, Diddy. His gaze never left mine while I put the plate in front of him. A slow and satisfied smile formed on his face. "Perfect." I didn't answer. I kept my hands bent in front of the apron, trying to look professional, trying to ignore sweat on my back. But then, he didn't touch the food. He just looked at me. The silence in the room was absolute. The other guests laughed softly, exchanging looks with each other, as if they were expecting something, as if they knew of a secret I didn't know. Diddy leaned forward, supporting his chin on his fingers. "You know, Cook, people here on my table like authentic experiences." My chest squeezed. The room looked smaller. "So I have a question. Have you ever tasted your own plate?" My heart fired. It was a game. I knew he wanted to see me react. My mind shouted, "Say yes. Say that you always prove the food before serving. Say anything and get out of there." But before I could open my mouth, one of the guests laughed. "Come on, Diddy, don't scare the novice." He's still getting used to it. Diddy didn't laugh. His gaze remained fixed on me, waiting, evaluating. I didn't know what to do. I could not refuse, but I also knew I shouldn't prove it. And then he smiled. "Relax, I'm just kidding." The table exploded in laughs. The moment broke like glass on the floor. But I knew that was not a joke. It was a test. And that night I passed, or at least that's what I thought. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to run. But all I could do was retreat one step and keep your look fixed on the wall behind the table, trying to ignore what happened right before me. The guests started eating, and I couldn't look away. The cutlery shaved against the porcelain. The sound of the flesh being cut was different, too humid, as if the fabrics were denser, more resistant than they should be. The smell was strange. I had already cooked all kinds of meat possible, but the aroma that climbed that dish was wrong, and they were delighting. One of the men, someone I recognized from TV interviews, a big figure from the music industry, chewing slowly, then turned to Diddy, smiling. "You really know how to choose, huh?" Diddy smiled, but his eyes were in me. "I always choose the best." A chill went up my spine. Another guest laughed, cleaning his mouth with a silk napkin. "I don't know if I like the taste or experience anymore." The whole room exploded in muffled laughs. My hands were sweating. The apron weighed on my body like lead. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But Diddy didn't take his eyes out of me. "Will you stay there? The service is not over yet." I swallowed and shook my head. "Yes, boss." My words came out hoarsely. I stayed there waiting, pretending not to hear the comments among the guests, pretending that I did not realize the eyes of complicity that they exchanged with each other, pretending that I didn't see what they were really eating. I tried to look at the neutral details, the chandelier above the table, the reflexes of the wine cups, the dark wood of the furniture, but everything around me seemed contaminated. The smell of cooked blood, the tracks of the meat staining the white dishes as too red, the satisfied smiles of those men and women as they enjoyed every piece. My stomach turned around. I could no longer ignore, but I couldn't get out either. So I did what I always did. I swallowed the disgust and continued. Dinner followed for another hour. Gifts, laughs, conversations about contracts and careers, who was going up and who was lost. They were relaxed. Fun. For them, that was just another exclusive event, another night of dark pleasures. For me, it was a warning. When the dessert was served, I took the moment to get out of the room discreetly. The heavy legs, the short breath. But when I arrived at the kitchen, I did not go straight to wash my hands as usual. I went to the trash. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Among the remains of food, between the discarded bones and the leftovers that would not normally be noticed, I saw something small, something human, a nail. The air disappeared from my lungs. The blood froze in my veins. I closed my eyes for a second, wishing to be wrong, but I knew from the beginning. From the moment I played in that meat, from the way the other cook refused to answer me, from the malicious eyes of the guests, I knew. I just didn't want to accept. I staggered away from the trash, choked on my own breath. I leaned on the sink, my hands squeezing the stainless steel edges so hard that my fingertips were white. Behind me, the kitchen door opened. I felt his presence before hearing his voice. Diddy. He approached slowly, his expensive perfume mixed with the metallic smell that still impregnated the air. You should stop thinking so much. My bowels turned around. He knew I had seen it. My voice came out hoarse, weak. What? What is happening here? He sighed as if tired of hearing the same question. You don't want to know. I wanted, but I knew that if I asked once more, I might not get out of the way. A year ago, I could never imagine that I would be in that position, in that kitchen, in that hell. I was just another chef in Los Angeles, trying to keep me alive in a market where talent was never enough. I spent years jumping from a restaurant in a restaurant, accumulating cuts on my fingers, burns on my arms, and a tiredness that never left. I worked 16 hours a day, earned a miserable salary, and tried to convince me that I was living my dream. But the reality was different. The restaurant where I worked was just like any other. Beautiful dishes for customers who barely knew what they were eating. Each dish was a work of art, but salaries? A joke. I spent the whole shift cooking food expensive that I couldn't afford to eat myself. And then the call came. It was late night. I had just finished an exhausting shift, my hands still smelling of garlic and onion, my eyes burning by tiredness. I was in the small apartment that divided with two other cooks, trying to ignore the pile of accounts on the table when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, thinking it could be some supplier or any job offer. But the voice on the other side was calm, controlled, and knew exactly who I was. We are looking for a chef with your level of experience. Your name was recommended. I was alert. My name recommended? By whom? It's a private opportunity, a high-level customer. Salary, 6 digits annually. I laughed. I could not avoid. It was absurd. No private chef made this kind of money unless he was cooking for billionaires or royalty members. But the voice across the phone wasn't kidding. It is a confidential contract. You will be cooking for someone very demanding. Everything will be provided to you. Accommodation, security, benefits. That didn't seem real. What did a chef like I did to deserve such an offer? Who was the customer? There was a break. His name cannot be revealed until the proposal accepts. That was my chance, I knew that. But I should have asked more questions. He should have questioned why they were so willing to hire me without even an interview. I should have asked me why no one mentioned the previous chef. But in the end, I was tired. Tired of exhaustive shifts, abusive chiefs, a salary that barely covered my rent. So I accepted. I signed the contract without reading the small letters. And the next day, a black car was waiting for me outside my building. At that moment, I still thought I was going to a job. Little did I know that I was entering a nightmare from which I couldn't escape. I've worked in several kitchens in my life. Trendy restaurants, 5-star hotels, exclusive events. There are always rules. Some are basic: hygiene, organization, respect for hierarchy. Others are less obvious. Do not ask too much. Do not move what should not. Do not irritate the boss. But in Diddy's kitchen, the rules didn't have to be said. You learned fast, because if you didn't learn, it didn't last long. Rule number 1, never ask where the ingredients come from. Each restaurant has a system, scheduled deliveries, reliable suppliers, invoices, all cataloged. This is how it should be. But there, none of this existed. The boxes arrived at night, never by the main entrance, never through the back gate. They came from a specific corridor where only some people were allowed to enter. The porters? Men in black. Always the same. Strong, silent, back eyes without expression. They were not normal delivery. The packages were large, vacuum sealed, without labels, no dates, nothing. Just meat. Once, when one of the porters passed me with one of the boxes, I realized that there was something running down the sides of the plastic. A dark, thick, too viscous liquid to be just meat juice. I tried to ask the cook beside me, "Where does it leave from?" He stopped the cut for a second, just a second. Then he returned to work and muttered, "You don't want to know," and that was the end of the conversation. The second time I asked, I received just one look, an empty look, lifeless, as if I had made a serious mistake just for speaking. The third time, I didn't ask anymore. Rule number 2, never prove special food. In cuisine, proving is essential. You adjust the spices, balance the flavors. But some dishes had different rules. The special dishes, they were not served with others, were prepared separately. No other stove could be on while we cooked these dishes. No other ingredient could be manipulated. Nothing could be changed, not a grass. And the strangest rule of all, never under any circumstances proving the food. One night after a long shift, I made an innocent comment, trying to relieve the tension. It must be thin thing. I wanted to try a piece. The cook's knife beside me stopped in the air. The looks around the kitchen turned to me. The silence was absolute. One of the oldest chefs stared at me and said with a cold voice, "Don't think about it." It was a warning. I never touched the subject again. Rule number 3, you only eat when Diddy allows. In most kitchens, there are times when chefs can eat. The work is hard. The food is our only reward. But here, nothing went through our mouth without permission. I only understood this in my first week, when I took a simple piece of bread from the bench. Before I could take it to the mouth, a security guard appeared out of nowhere. He said nothing, just looked at me. But the message was clear. I put the bread back on the plate. I saw Diddy laughing in the corner of the kitchen. He had seen. He always saw. Rule number 4, Diddy can do whatever you want with you. This was not about food, it was about power. After an exhaustive shift, almost 3 in the morning, one of the assistants appeared. "Diddy wants a plate." Now, I was dead, but I knew I had no choice. I prepared the plate. I took it to your room. The door was ajar. Inside, he was lying on the bed, naked. A woman was beside him, immovable. It seemed doped. "Put there." He pointed to the table without moving. I did what he said and turned to go out. "Have you seen such a body before?" My spine froze. I kept walking. I didn't answer. "Won't you say anything?" My mouth dried up. My stomach rolled. "I just make food." I heard his laugh behind me as he left the room. She still echoes in my head. The next day, I went to the director of the house. "I don't want to go to his room anymore." She looked at me, expressionless. "If you can't handle it, you can leave." But before opening the door, she added something. "Just don't expect to find work anywhere after that." She wasn't threatening me, she was warning me. There, at that moment, I knew I was stuck. And in that house, there were no exits. I should have closed my eyes. I should have looked the other hand. I should have kept pretending that I knew nothing. But that night I saw, and after you see, there is no way to go back. It was late. The kitchen was almost empty. Dinner had been a success, at least for them. The guests had laughed, drunk, delighted with every bite of that special dish. I couldn't get out of my head. The smell, the texture, the way I cut under the knife. That was not normal meat. I needed air. I needed to get out of there. But before I left, I needed to take the trash out. I took one of the heaviest bags and dragged him down the kitchen floor. The black plastic was damp, dripping a thick, dark liquid. It was not fat. It was not a sauce. I reached the outer trash and pissed the bag inside. But when I turned to leave, I heard something tear. The bag had left, and in the middle of the trash, I saw. At first, my mind refused to process. I tried to convince myself that it was just any bone, perhaps pork, perhaps a veal, but it wasn't, because I had a phalanx. It was a human bone. My lungs crashed. The world around me turned. It can't be that. But then I saw something else. Something small, something attached to the plastic of the bag. A nail. Human. The bile rose to my throat. The smell of the cooked meat that night came back as a punch in the stomach. My knees gave way, and I vomited right there on the concrete floor of the kitchen exit. What had I served? What had they eaten? I wanted to run. I wanted to run away and never come back. But before I could move, I felt a shadow behind me, a firm squeeze on my shoulder, a low, cold voice. Forget what you saw. I turned slowly. One of the security guards was there. His eyes were empty, no emotion. Go inside. Now my head swung from side to side as denying itself. Is this human flesh? My voice came out shaky. He didn't answer, but I didn't need to. The squeeze on my shoulder got stronger. Now, I didn't argue, because at that moment, I understood that if I argued, maybe I would end in that black bag the next night. I returned into the house in shock. My hands trembled so much that I could barely open the sink tap to wash my face. But no matter how much I rubbed my hands, the smell didn't come out. And the only thing I could think was, I cooked it, I served that, and I let them eat. I left that kitchen. But I never really escaped, because after you see, after you understand, there is no way to be who you were before. In the days following the discovery, I tried to act normally. I tried to pretend I didn't know. But each time I cut a piece of meat, each time I smelled the fire, my stomach rolled. It was impossible not to think. And Diddy, he knew. He always knew. The next night, as we prepare another dinner, he entered the kitchen without a noise, just watching me. His gaze stuck in me as I held the knife. So with a small smile, he said, "You do an amazing job. I knew you were right for that." I swallowed. My hand squeezed the knife cable. For a second, I thought to use it, but he read my thoughts. He approached slowly, like an animal who knows he has already won the hunt. Its strong perfume mingled with the smell of meat in the environment. And then he whispered, "I know you're smart. I know you won't make any bullshit." It was a warning. It was a clear warning. I spent all night trying to decide what to do. Go away, to fake, denounce. But who? The police. Who would protect me later? Who would believe me? The next morning, I made my choice. I left the house without warning anyone. I left everything behind. And for a while, it looked like I had escaped. But of course, I never really escaped. Because there are things you can't forget. There are smells that never get out of the skin. It has memories that get stuck in the corners of your mind, waiting to haunt you when you least expect it. And the worst of all, I know this is still happening. I know they are still there, having lunch, laughing, eating, and no one does anything. Because no one wants to believe these things happen in the real world. But I ask you, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you have the courage to expose this? Or would you pretend you never saw? Watch out for the answer, because some truths, they should never be discovered.